Good. We're ready, Chairman.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the November 16th. Yeah, the November 16th staff meeting. So, thank you, commissioners, for being here. And Tom, I'll turn it over to the county manager.
Thanks, Chairman. Good morning, Commission. A couple of items this morning. On the agenda, on the BOCC agenda for tomorrow is the legislative platform. So we were going to use today's staff meeting just to have Akeem walk you through kind of what that's shaping up to be, and he'll talk about three lists. We have what we think is maybe shaping up to be a priority list, a second list of subsidiary kinds of requests, and then we have a group of other that we need some guidance from the commission on where you want to stick those on the list or not. So we'll do that first. And then I think after last night's town hall meeting, it might be good to kind of decompress that discussion last night. And I think Mr. Papoon and Mr. Fessinger would kind of like to talk with commission about that. So after the platform, we'll talk about that also. And those are the two items for today. So without further ado, we'll start with Akeem. I think you all have a copy of what he's provided on your desk.
Okay. Thank you, Tom, and good morning, Akeem.
Hey, good morning, Chairman. Akeem Ashford, Communications Director. Give me 1 second here. So we'd like to start the conversation as Tom kind of preempted. We've kind of worked with leadership and Mike Papoon to come up with what you guys are familiar with, what we've done in the past, putting priority issues followed by supporting issues of importance, and then lastly, other. And so just kind of going through that, we've got department heads either in person, on the phone, or by Zoom, who can kind of help us lead this discussion. So for the first one, we've got critical funding for mental behavioral health issues affecting Sedgwick County. And then you've got a number of bullet points that kind of support that ask. First being strengthen and enhance the Medicaid safety net, the model through enhanced rates for behavioral health. There's an ask to fund a 4% rate increase for behavioral health reimbursement codes to address the behavioral health needs of the uninsured and underinsured, support community crisis center funding, support for regionalized state mental health facilities, including one here in Sedgwick County, to continue funding and fully fund the 988 suicide prevention line that goes live next year, and ask for tuition reimbursement for CommCare social workers. And then last but not least, accelerating the licensing for CommCare workers. The next bullet, number 2, is the increase and ask to increase funding to community corrections by $14.3 million. As you guys have heard over the last couple of months, Glenda's asked for this funding to improve programming as well as retention and hire new employees. We've got the Charter Commission back on under priority issues. This is just kind of a continuation from our work from last year. And then we'll move into supporting issues of importance. The Division of Finance as well as IT are asking for fund creation. Lindsay has asked for this for a number of years, so hoping to push legislators to allow us to be able to create those fund balances. Expiration place, I talked to Adam just this morning as he was in the doctor's office. He's basically asking for a sales tax exemption on membership at this point. He kind of talked about gyms who have sales tax exemptions on their memberships, as well as like the Sedgwick County Zoo. So he's asking for that as well for expiration place. CDDO, they're asking to develop a comprehensive plan, so they'd like legislators to fund a survey to look at long-term effects that affect their department. Broadband access, as you guys may remember, this was on last year's priority list of issues. Commissioner Dennis in his district is pushing this issue, and again, that's on the supporting issues of importance for this year as well. Under other issues, commissioners, we've got Medicaid expansion, as well as support EMS licensing study to lessen time for licensing. The suspended look-back law, this is a continuation as well from Commissioner Howell from last year's session. And then we've got Senate Bill 367, the Criminal Justice Reform Bill, as well as a stormwater mitigation. And under there, you see that Johnson County currently has this, generates $22 million last year with a 1/10 sales tax. So with that, Commissioners, I'll take any questions, and then we can begin that conversation.
Okay, any questions? Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Akeem. Did you say that Jason was on the line?
Jason is going to be at the meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
Or on the line tomorrow. He will be present tomorrow. He's not here today.
Okay, great. So just kind of walking through these, and Tim, I don't know if you might come up, if you don't mind. Yesterday at the Mental Health Coalition meeting, we were talking about some of these, some of the same language. And so I guess in the past couple of times we've had this, I've asked for more specific language around what are the amounts of funding that we're asking for. So yesterday at the coalition meeting, when we talked about fund a 4% rate increase, it was about $10 million statewide. Is that correct?
Correct.
So is it best, and I'm just kind of asking a general question, is it best to join in and align with the coalition and say $10 million for the whole state, or are we going to ask for a certain amount just for Sedgwick County?
I think some of the conversations we had in prior years is it helps if we align ourselves with other entities that are looking at things from a statewide perspective so that legislators across the state are able to support them and not say that's just a Sedgwick County issue. So the Association of Community Mental Health Centers has an item on their legislative agenda that supports increased funding. And so if we were to use the same numbers that the association did and that the coalition did, I think it's a stronger message if all three of us are saying the same thing.
Okay, so if we could make sure that we just kind of align, if that's okay with everybody and everybody's fully understanding what I'm talking about, that language with a dollar amount, with the additional language of we're just increasing the rates to what the physical health rates were increased to back in 2008, right? So we're getting, is that right?
I don't think it was 2008. I think it was more recent than that, but we can get that.
2014, excuse me.
Yeah, we can get that from the association as well.
Okay, so we haven't increased our rates since 2008.
Correct.
We're trying to get them to, or maybe it was 2012, it's one of those 2 years, from the physical health. So I know I'm all over the place right now. Okay, so I guess the point that I'm trying to make as I ramble through this would be $10 million. What would be the dollar amount?
Well,
Increase the rate by, or increase this funding by how
by
much?
4%.
So we're not going to give
And
a
the
dollar
fiscal-
amount?
Well, and then we could use language in there that talks about a fiscal note of $10 million.
Okay,
I'll work with the association to get the language that they're using and see if that is consistent with what you would like to use.
okay. Is that what you would suggest?
I think so. I think we want to use language similar to what the association's using.
Okay. So if we could go back to the bullet above that, strengthen and enhance the Medicaid safety net model. So if we use the same philosophy around giving a dollar amount, what would that dollar amount be?
There isn't a fiscal note that's attached to that. That is more about supporting the CCBHC model across the state.
Okay.
Right now, it's in place in a number of pilots, but what we would like is for the department to support CCBHC model implementation across the state for all the CMHCs, including ComCare.
So how do they support that? Is that a vote that they'll make? How do they actually support that?
Well, they primarily support it through direction to the department, to KDADs. It's an administrative function. The legislature supports the administration financially. So if the legislature can support KDAD's budget to include CCBHC funding across the board for the payment reform model, then that's how that all works.
Okay.
I don't think there's a specific dollar ask at this point in time. We're really talking about changing the way behavioral health is funded at the community level through the CCBHC model. And that's going to take a change in the state Medicaid plan, and it's going to take support from the department.
Okay, so the fourth bullet of support community crisis center funding, again, same question.
Similar answer. Again, we're asking that they continue to fund all of the existing community crisis centers, and that as they include new ones and support new ones across the state, that they increase funding for the entire system rather than leaving the funding flat but adding more. So the biggest fear is that they approve additional community crisis centers across the state but don't increase funding, because then that reduces the amount of funding for everyone. So it's really more of a philosophical approach to the legislature supporting the department's budget to make sure that those are funded across the board.
So when we're advocating for this, are there some numbers that you could get us as far as across the board, what the whole system is funded at? If they were to add, what they would need to increase it to?
Yes, I'll work on that.
Okay. I think that's it for now, Chairman. I'm sure I'll have more questions as the morning goes along.
Okay, Commissioner Dennis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Akeem, you're going to have to refresh my mind on what Senate Bill 367 does.
So this was actually a continuation from Commissioner Howell, from his ask from last year. So 367 is, and if I'm correct, Commissioner, the Criminal Justice Reform Bill. So looking at, help me out, Commissioner.
Commissioner Howell?
I'd be glad to answer the question if that's okay.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. So back in 2016, the Kansas legislature passed Senate Bill 367, which was intended to be moving away from status quo to a more community-based programming solution to juvenile offender situation in each community. And it has had mixed results. Part of what happens is arguably working great, and it's more efficient, and it seems to work really good for some of the population. But there's another part of the population it doesn't seem to work. We've taken some tools away from the judges. We've taken some tools away from the district attorney. We've taken the tools away from our corrections staff, and now we've got kids that are not being charged with crimes when they're not engaging the community-based programming, and then we have intermingled with SINC kids, children in need of care. As a consequence, we've got some juvenile offenders that are being placed in foster care, and the bad experiences in foster care system is actually causing people to pull away from the foster program, and now we have a lack of beds available for children in need of care. And it goes back to what caused all this to happen. Well, initially, I think there was, Council of State Governments and other organizations that recommended this as a way to become more efficient and more effective. And I think that, again, for some states that have done this, that have kind of kept their old tools in the toolbox, that have added this to their tool chest, that it actually has worked pretty well for some kids. But for some kids, it doesn't work. And Kansas, I think, went too far. So tomorrow I have a meeting with some judges or some correction staff, DA staff, and legislators to come together to talk about this. I'll just tell you, last Friday, I went to the what's called continuing education requirements for the attorneys in our community. This year they offered an expose or a day's worth of training on this very topic, and it was 177 people from the community attended that event. It is a hot topic, and if you talk to anybody in corrections, DA staff, or the judicial part of our county government, they all will agree that there needs to be some reconsideration of some of the things that 367 did. And it is impacting our foster kids, it's impacting our youth. Our crime rates arguably are not being charged. Some of the charges are not happening the way they have before. And you might don't be misled and think that we solved these problems. The problem is we're not adjudicating the issues, we're simply not charging. And some of the crime things are still happening, and we're just not taking them through the court process. And so there's a lot to be done here. The reality is 367 is complicated. There's a lot of smart people in this building and our juvenile corrections that would love to come together and have that discussion tomorrow. The reality is that conversation probably needs to happen before we can actually hone in on exactly what needs to happen here. I have my own ideas, but I'd like to let those experts talk about that with the legislators and come up with a crisp list of 2 or 3 things that we can address in 367 to essentially give those tools back to the judges, DAs, and correction staff and hopefully keep our kids, get them to have more effective programming that actually works, and bring this 500 kids back, or 350 to 500 kids back to county. Right now they're being placed out of county because we have a lack of foster beds, which is basically happened as a result of this bill. So it's a socioeconomic issue, but if we don't get involved in this, we have a lobbyist that's very effective. This is it's a policy bill. It's not about asking for funding. It's about policy. It's about how we handle this particular population. And right now what we're doing works in some cases, and in some cases it doesn't. In some cases it doesn't work. And so we're asking for a reconsideration to give these tools back to the judges and prosecutors and correction staff to hopefully have better solutions for the kids that actually need that type of help. So it's a lot of information, but to answer the question, 367 is, again, it's well-intentioned, but it needs to have some reconsideration. And I think there's a lot of folks in this building, if you ask them, including our chief judge and others in this building, they're going to tell you this is a critical issue for Sedgwick County. There's other things on here, other things on this list I'd like to talk about as well, but that question, since that question came up, hopefully it answers your question.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I just didn't remember anything by 367. I remember you and I had a meeting with the DA and with some of the judges about this, or the good kids, when they end up in the criminal justice system, kind of turn around. The bad kids end up going to jail or something, and the ones in between are the ones that kind of looking at, if I can summarize it briefly. Okay, well, that answers that. I just didn't want to confuse that with what issue that I'm concerned about, and that's trying to get some additional judges here in our courthouse to put together a veterans court and a mental health court. And so I would certainly like to include something to add judges for 2 specialty courts.
I support that.
That's all I had right now.
Okay.
I'll
Can I have
have
a-
more comments later.
All right.
Thank you.
Follow-up question on this Senate Bill 367. I mean, we've talked here a lot, but are the municipal judges involved in this at all? No. Okay. Because there's something that we were talking about before, and I had some feedback from chief judge, municipal judges.
I was talking about municipal court.
Municipal courts.
Municipal court judges with respect to suspended driver's license
Okay.
opportunities.
That's a different.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's
Okay.
on this list here. I'd like to talk about that when you give me an opportunity, sir.
Well, we can talk about that shortly, but
I will,
I can
whenever
tell
you're
you
ready.
that municipal court judges already have, from what I understand, they have flexibility, and they have, and the prosecutors have flexibility, and I think we're stepping into their lane if we.
Well,
if
let's
we
talk
try
about
to
that
do
when
it.
it's the appropriate time. I have more information about that as
All
well.
right, okay. Commissioner Lopez?
Thank you. I guess I'm confused on why I'm not really seeing anything for our health department, except for under other issues, Medicaid expansion, there's an increased technology for Sedgwick County Health Department.
Good morning, Commissioners. Yes, that it's not really IT that we're going after, and I did reach out to the state association called Kansas Association of Local Health Departments and received their 2022 policy statement, and funding is their priority as well. Last year, CALD did help secure an increase of $1 million, which was the first time in almost 30 years that there was an increase to our aid to local funding that we receive every year. That is to really help support infrastructure in local health departments. They are requesting an additional $1.6 million to that aid to local funding, and a permanent increase in the minimum payment allocations to local health departments, and also supporting increased funding both state and federal level.
So should we add that in similar way that we're doing with ComCare, where they have a state, or, they're doing it at a higher level and we're kind of matching that language? So, it would make sense that we would do that for our health department as well.
Yes, and I would appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Cruz?
A couple of questions. So like number 5, the broadband access, what are some things with the new bills that are coming out federally that will take care of some of these things that we have on our platform right now? Lindsay's shaking her head in the back. Can you come address us? So for instance, broadband, I think there was a water issue over here, stormwater mitigation.
Yes, ma'am. So the infrastructure bill just got signed yesterday. It has extensive funding for broadband as well as extensive funding for water, sewer, road, bridge. And we, I think, are planning to give you an update on that here within the next few weeks, probably alongside when we give you the COVID update, just because so many things, so many needs we've heard related to our ARPA bucket probably can be picked up either in that infrastructure bill or through the capital projects funding that the state of Kansas will be having. So I think that will be a very timely consideration to discuss too. But I also think some of that funding may come through the state. And so to the extent it makes sense to state that broadband is a priority for Sedgwick County, that may help position us for some of those allocations once they start coming down.
Great, that would be.
And same argument for drainage and
Yes.
Flood water?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So in the same breath that we're talking about matching language with other organizations for ComCare and the health department, would we be doing that with, to increase the funding for community corrections as well? Is the, I guess they're probably not asking for any more money because they're already paying their people more than us. So.
Glenda's on Zoom. Let's see if we can maybe throw that question at her.
Glenda?
Good morning, Commissioners.
Hello.
Hi. I'm sorry, I did not hear that question. Could you ask again?
Yeah, I just wondered if you had any sort of state level contacts or any of your boards at a different level that might be interested in handling salaries as far as community corrections goes. But then I realized that they're already paying their people more anyway, so I don't know that they would be trying to increase funding for us. But how can we partner with other organizations, I guess is what I'm asking. Is there an opportunity to do that?
Yes, and we are doing that right now. We are partnering with KCCA, which is the Kansas Community Corrections Association, and the Community Corrections Advisory Committee. And I think maybe the judges, they have a judges group as well. I'm not totally sure how involved, but I know that they're going to maybe bring some of those folks to the Wednesday meeting to talk. But yes, we are and then all the other districts are also making that ask. Meeting to talk.
All the other what are making that ask?
Yes.
I'm sorry, you kind of cut out. Someone called.
I'm sorry. There are all the other counties, the directors of all the other counties are making the same asks of their BOCCs too.
Okay.
So it's a statewide initiative.
Great. Okay, so just making sure that we have that language, however it's being worded across all of those organizations so that we fit and it's easier for people to understand. Okay. That's it as of now, Chairman.
Okay,
Might be more.
Commissioner Howell.
Commissioner, let me start on page 2, under number 4, CDDO. Stabilize the current IDD systems, service system and reinforce support for local expertise. Is that a funding issue? It's not clear to me exactly what we're asking for that statement.
Good morning, Tim Kaufman. Dee's out of town today, so I'm going to try and cover that for you. It is more of an administrative issue. The department, again, needs to be funded adequately. KDES needs to be funded adequately so that they can manage this program. And one of the ways that they need to manage the program is to work on a statewide review of the waiting list and figure out how they're going to resolve that.
Is that, so what you just mentioned a second ago, is then that the first bullet here about develop a comprehensive plan for the elimination of HCBS waiver what waiting list?
Akeem, can Correct, that's the first bullet point.
So my first question was about the third bullet point. Stabilize the current service system and reinforce support for local expertise. What are we asking for exactly?
We're asking for them to adequately fund the administrative responsibilities of a CDDO.
Okay,
And that's a system issue again as well.
so it's funding, okay.
It's funding.
That's what I was asking about. And in terms of the words elimination, again, that's a nice word, but I'd like to live in more pragmatic world. I'd like to use the word reduce or manage as a replacement word for the word elimination. Maybe to say, to plan for the reduction of or improve management of the waiting list. The waiting list is never going to go away. I think the idea that we would eliminate that is probably, is not a reasonable or rational statement as it's currently worded. I would like to change that just a little bit so it's more pragmatic. We know the list is too long. We'd like to address the list. I think reducing that list or finding better ways of managing that list might be a better way to say that.
For families that are on the waiting list, I agree with you. I think that the waiting list is a really large financial issue for the state to address. Reduction is more realistic, but elimination needs to be the ultimate goal.
I guess at the end of the session, I'd like to be able to say, we checked the box, we did what we said we were going to do. We successfully lobbied our issue, and we checked that box and got it done. We got a bill done and did exactly what we asked them to do. The way it's worded, we're never going to check that box. My point is, I'd like to have it worded in such a way we know what success looks like. And if you can give them a bill that says, here's what we're actually asking you to do, and we're really happy with this bill, we're pushing this thing forward, and we can celebrate at the end of session, we checked, got something done. The way this is worded, that's not a possibility, I don't think. So I'm just trying to say, how can we bring these things back to what does success actually look like, and articulate that in these statements versus, I hear people say we want to end homelessness or end suicide. I love those. Those are great goals. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. I mean, those are great things to say, but in the reality is we want to reduce homelessness. We want to reduce suicide. So I'm just saying, pragmatically, we want to do the same thing. We want to affect this thing by making it better than it is today. But in terms of saying our goal is to have zero, I wish that were possible. I'm not sure that that's exactly what we're trying to do because I don't think it's possible.
If you would like to identify, if your goal is to reduce the waiting list by 25% or 50%, I can work with Interhab and find a number to inject into that statement to say, increase funding to address waiting list by 20
Exactly.
million, whatever the number is.
We call those what, smart goals? Yeah, we want to have a smart goal here. I think that's it has to be achievable. And if you can't achieve it by the way it's written, then I have a concern about how it's written. So again, I think this belongs on the list. I'd just like to reword it a little bit so it's clear what we're actually asking for with something we can measure and achieve. That's all I'm saying. Okay. That's my personal opinion on that. The sales tax, I asked a question, how much money do people pay in sales tax for memberships or for admission to Exploration Place? Do we know?
Commissioner, Adam, when I talked to him, he didn't have that number available, but I can work with him to get that for tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm not saying in total, I'm saying, per person.
Yeah.
Per membership or per admission. I think we ought to know that.
Okay.
We're asking essentially for a tax cut. I don't know whether or not this would affect someone making a decision to go there or not, or whether to buy a membership or not. Is the amount of tax a consideration that person actually has as they make that decision? I don't know. again, I love tax cuts, but I'm just curious, we're actually asking for them to spend a lot more money on this entire platform, pretty much. And at the same time, we're asking for a tax cut on this one thing. So to me, it's, those sales taxes go to fund local government and state government, the very programs we're talking about. So I'm just curious if someone is buying a membership or buying admission to an entertainment venue, an educational venue, I'm not so sure that sales tax is necessarily going to change their decision to go in. Well, I need to know the magnitude of the sales tax. Plus, last time we talked about this, there was some discussion about Sedgwick County Zoo does charge sales tax on admission. So someone said that. Is that true? I assume they charge sales tax on the gift shop sales, but in terms of memberships or admission, again, I think whatever the zoo gets, Exploration Place should be on the same playing field. I'm just, I guess I'd be interested to know exactly how do these compare. So the premise is that the zoo has a sales tax exemption on memberships and admissions where Exploration Place does not.
It's my understanding that the zoo charges sales tax for admissions. I'm still trying to get an answer on memberships, but my understanding is they're charging on admissions, and so that may be why in Adam's conversation with Akeem this morning, the focus was on memberships. So I'll get clarity on that for you.
Okay, and then one thing they can do is they can adjust their membership rates to account for whatever sales tax needs to be collected, so they have nice round numbers. That might be one way to handle that, just a thought. Anyway, a couple more things, Chairman, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I noticed on page 1, everything on page 1 is a funding request. I'm not saying these aren't good things. I think everything on this list is good, but I think we need to prioritize. We have 7 things on page 1, and there's several other things on page 2 that are also funding things. But out of these funding requests, can we not prioritize these? In fact, some of these are overlapping. The statements almost overlap. Let me give you an example. Community Crisis Center funding, behavioral health needs. So those are kind of the same thing in some way, aren't they? Why can't we put those together?
I think the mental health item is too busy. I mean, there's 8 bullet points on one issue. I think the commission, we'd like guidance on what your focus is as a commission of these bullets, what's priority and what could maybe be ancillary, and then clean that up to some degree and shorten this with a more specific request. I agree, Commissioner, this one needs work. But I think, I don't know that we can have 5 priorities, 6 priorities, 7 priorities on one item. I think we'd like some guidance from commission on what you guys see as most important.
I mean, just say this, if I was going to write this myself, I would say, mental health support. And under that, I'd say suicide, sub-bullets, suicide prevention hotline, mental health facility in Sedgwick County, crisis center funding, 4% enhancement on reimbursement rates. Those are sub-bullets, but they're all connected to the same overarching topic, which is mental health. To me, that's just cleaner. In other words, you're talking to someone in the elevator, you say, look, we have a lot of mental health needs in Sedgwick County. There's a lot of things that kind of tie into this. Here's my tiny little card with my platform on it. It says mental health funding. And if you'd like to know more, there's like 6 things we could talk about that relate to mental health funding in Sedgwick County. To me, if you want to do it that way, that's more strategic. If you ask for 8 things, or 7 or 8 things here that are all kind of connected with long sentences, I don't know that you're going to get their attention. My personal opinion. I want to be effective in Topeka. Also, we're asking for a lot of, we're asking for a lot of spending in Sedgwick County. We ought to have fiscal notes on these, every one of these. What are we actually asking for in terms of funding, not for just Sedgwick County, but for the entire state of Kansas? If you did everything that's on this list, we need to have fiscal notes. What do we think is going to cost the state? Because we talk about these things. This one's $10 million, someone said. Okay? Of that, probably $2 million comes to Sedgwick County on that one thing. Some of these things are focused on Sedgwick County. Some of these things are focused on the entire state and its policy issues. I would like to know, if we were perfectly successful in all of these things, how much money are we talking about? I think it's a pretty big number. So if they're not going to give us all the things we ask for, what are the hottest things on this list? We really need to, I think, if I was the legislator, I'd say, okay, there's 7 things here. Which one's your number one? How are you going to answer that question? That's a good question. What's number one? Somebody needs to help us with that. I think that's my, I would change the way this is done, is my personal opinion. Going back down to a couple of other things here. Charter Commission is policy. That's how the state, in my opinion, will probably support that. I think they really will. The fund creation issues on supporting issues of importance, numbers 1 and 2, that's policy. That just gives us tools in the toolbox. It's not going to cost them anything. There's no fiscal note to the state. I expect those will pass this year. We already talked about the tax cut. I already talked about CDDO. I have a concern about broadband access. There seems like there's a lot of topics. The federal government's talking about doing broadband right now with the infrastructure plan signed yesterday by the president. That's part of that plan. There was a recent article about, I don't know, whatever, internet through satellite, I guess, service. I'm not sure where we at on that, but apparently that's not too far away. If that's within a couple of years, is that not something we should be looking at as part of the solution here? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think somebody needs to understand. Do we need to run a fiber down every county road and provide service at that level to check this box, or is there something in the works that's going to answer the question? I don't know the answer.
Good morning, Commissioners. Yeah, there are a lot of questions out there. Most of the grants that are available, either federal or state, have a speed requirement to them, which for the most part can only be achieved through a hardline connection. The satellite technologies really haven't been proven yet as far as their reliability and speed bandwidth. The wireless that exists in Sedgwick County as well as other areas around is a little bit unreliable as well due to weather, line of sight, that kind of thing. So the state and the federal, as far as I know, have some pretty strict requirements around that bandwidth for awarding. And that bandwidth can really only be achieved by a hardline connection.
I'm glad you're at the microphone. Let me just say, I saw an article just about 2 or 3 months ago talked about, I guess, the SpaceX services that, again, it's supposed to be much faster than anything we would have currently available to anybody. It's going to be a step up for everyone, and it's the entire globe actually has same access. If that's within a year or 2 or 3 away, which it sounds like that's the plan, would we? You said it's not proven yet, but is that not where they claim they're headed?
It remains to be seen. It's still so early in its deployment. There are several more launches of satellites and the mesh technology that they're using to connect them all and connect, like you said, throughout the whole planet. Just has a ways to go yet. I wouldn't expect that within the next 3 to 4 years.
Well, anyway, I guess make my comment. It seemed that they were very confident that this technology was proven and that they're deploying it, and it's within a couple of years as being available to everyone. So, if that was true, I'm not saying it is, but if it was true, then I would probably want to change strategies, because trying to get state and federal money to run wiring down the roads is arguably going to be a multi-year process to get there. I'm not saying you couldn't do some of that, but I think at the end of the day, we want to be able to have high-speed internet everywhere, and the question is which is going to be which is going to get deployed faster. I think to get to every place in Sedgwick County and every place across the state of Kansas, that other technology is about to pass them up, so to speak. So I don't know that I mind this on this list here, but there's a lot of movement here already. I don't know. If we did not have this on the list, is this topic not already a hot topic in Topeka? Isn't everybody talking about this already? I mean, I would agree this is important to Sedgwick County, but if we don't have this on our list, isn't this not something that's being discussed by pretty much the entire state? I mean, Governor Kelly's been talking about it. Her opponent in this gubernatorial race has been talking about it. Western Kansas has a much bigger stake at this than I think even anybody in Sedgwick. Western Sedgwick County certainly has a big stake, but Western Kansas even more so. So I think this is a pretty hot topic. So I don't know that it belongs on our tiny platform. I think we could probably almost skip this issue knowing it's going to be a discussion no matter what we do.
Commissioner, can I just...
Please
allow me to interrupt. if you were at any of the Greater Wichita Partnership meetings, everything else, it's a big deal. There are parts of Sedgwick County, even communities, Hayesville outlying, there's citizens and students driving to a hotspot to get on the internet. And so the broadband, I think we need to be supportive of it.
Okay.
The broadband expansion. It's important for the whole community.
Again, I hope I've been clear. I support the idea we need to have better broadband. I've said that numerous times. But I'm just saying, I don't know if Sedgwick County government needs to actually push the issue personally, because I think it's a very hot topic everywhere already anyway. That's all I try to say. And there's technology that's coming up, but we don't know where we're at with that. If it stays on this list, I'm fine with that. And then back to the back page there, on the issue of municipal courts. So the judges have the authority to allow a plea to a lesser charge. That is true. In policy, however, some municipal courts are not allowing that as a local policy. And I believe that Wichita is part of that. So I can't say for sure. I don't want to get involved in their business, but the reality is we have 100,000 suspended drivers in Sedgwick County still, despite the fact that we passed last year, worked on Senate Bill 127 and it passed. That basically allows people to reinstate their license more quickly without having mandatory suspension, long periods of time not being able to get to the driver's license and be able to drive legally. But secondly, it also allowed for judges to reduce fines and fees on those that have poverty concerns, poverty issues. They could be a little bit, trying to help them get back on their feet. And it actually, and in terms of, prosecutors can actually, based on someone trying to get back on their feet, if they wanted to do that, they have the legal latitude to reduce the charging to something, allowing that person to plead to a lesser charge. The problem is, in Sedgwick County, it's not actually happening. The second part of this is, on suspended driver's licenses, it's a lifetime look back. The lifetime look back is very unique to Sedgwick County. Very unique to Kansas. This is not something that happens across the entire country. So if you get a speeding ticket when you're in your teens, let's just say, and you don't pay that ticket, and you end up with a suspended driver's license, and maybe you didn't know it was suspended, and you're driving around, and then you get caught. That goes on your record, and that will never leave your record, even if you're in your 50s and 60 years old. That suspended driver's license charge is on there forever. And when you get to 2 or 3 of those, the minimum penalties on a third driving while suspended, even if it's completely done administratively, is 6 months. Sorry, is it 6 months or 90 days? I forget the number now. It's either 90 days or 180 days in jail. I think it's 6 months in jail. I may be off. I think it's 6 months in jail. So its minimum sentence is 6 months in jail. And the vast majority of people who are driving unsuspended are done. These are suspensions that are of administrative nature. Others, they're not reckless driving. They're not DUI. They're not fleeing and eluding. They're not those types of things. These are people who have a suspended license because they didn't pay a ticket. They should have paid, but they didn't pay the ticket. Most cases, it's because they don't have the money. And again, they should have paid the ticket. They shouldn't have been speeding in the first place. But that suspended driver's license ends up on the record, and it's there forever. And in some municipalities, including Wichita, I've talked to the judges, I've talked to the prosecutors, I've talked to the defense attorneys. They don't have even though legally they have the latitude to reduce fines and fees, they don't exercise that across the street. They don't have the latitude as a local policy, and the prosecutors can't let them plead to a lesser charge. And the lifetime look back is a problem for the entire state. So take all this together, we still have 100,000 people in Sedgwick County potentially driving around, or they can't go to work, they can't pay for their kids, they can't pay their restitution, they can't pay their fines because they can't keep their job. We don't have good public transportation, and on it goes. And so these are people who are victims of poverty. And this especially impacts communities of color. If we want to have criminal justice reform, this is a very, very, very important topic. Anybody who's involved in criminal justice reform knows this is a hot issue. And if we're not going to put this on the platform and lead on this issue, then I don't know who is. So last year we finally got on board. We worked with the DA office. We worked with Sheriff's Association and others, and we finally got one bill passed, Senate Bill 127. It was a great bill. It's not being implemented in Wichita. The things that help out people in Sedgwick County, if they have a charge from Wichita, they're not exercising the provisions of 127. Consequently, if someone is so desperate they're going to drive anyway, it's a terrible choice. I wish they wouldn't do that. But if they are driving anyway, and they get another situation, they get pulled over and get into an accident, sometimes they make another bad choice, and they'll flee an accident, or they'll be driving without insurance. And insurance for people who all have suspended license, typically it's 4 to 5, even 6 times higher cost for insurance. And since this whole thing started out as a victim of poverty, these people can't afford their insurance, and so they're driving around without insurance. This is a problem that impacts all of us, one way or the other. It's not safe to drive on our streets when there's people out there dealing with this issue, and there's no way for them to climb out of this hole. So I think it's important on this list, absolutely. And then I'll stop talking about these other things unless anybody has questions about the other ones. I'll talk about them if you have questions. Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple. I'll just comment, follow up quickly is I think the sheriff and the municipal judges it's in their lane. I think what you're saying, it needs to be backed. 100,000 suspended license out of 500,000 people, of which I don't even know how many are over the age of 16. That's a large number, and again, based on feedback from the last time this discussion had, the flexibility of judges at the municipal level needs to be taken in consideration before we take a stand to tell them what to do.
So let me bifurcate one of my comments. There's 2 issues here. There's the willingness to exercise Senate Bill 127, the provisions in that bill that in Wichita are not being utilized. I'm just going to make a statement. I've talked to prosecutors and judges across the street and defense attorneys. In practice, it's not happening. The other part of this issue, the other half of this statement is the lifetime look back. And if you compare this with other crimes, other types of, other issues that go through our courts, the penalties for suspended driver's licenses are extreme compared to other things. Again, it doesn't make sense that this is so out of balance. And so the legislative part of this is the lifetime look back. The first part of that is, which is not part of that lifetime look back issue, is the fact that some municipalities are refusing to exercise the provisions of Senate Bill 127.
Okay.
Okay.
Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. First of all, as I go through the whole thing now, the priority issues, I agree that item number 1 is too busy. We need to shorten that up. We've got way too many items on there. But I think that they can be worked by both our lobbyists and the commissioners as we go up and talk about each one of these. So somehow, Akeem, you're going to have to go through and get these down. There's no way that we can have our nice palm card listing all of this detail. So shorten that up. As we go through, I'm also interested in the zoo. Whatever the zoo is doing, I want to make sure that we're doing the same thing for Exploration Place. If I don't want to have one doing one thing and one doing something else. Tim, it looks like has an answer for me.
The zoo does have an exemption on their memberships. They do charge sales tax on their general admission, individual admissions, but they do not have an exemption on their memberships.
Okay.
That's what Adam's asking for as well.
So as we put that forward, and I have no problem with putting it forward, as long as it's exactly the same as the zoo, I'm fine with that. As we go down to CDDO, I don't know if elimination is the right word or not, but it's got to be our goal. If I was a parent and had a child that needed this service, and I've got years, many years waiting list, it's unacceptable. So really, the goal has got to be elimination of it in the future. If there's a better word, I'm fine with that. But I am not going to sit here and say that, hey, it's fine that someone waits 7, 8, 9 years before they can get their child involved in having services provided. So I don't know. I still think elimination is something we ought to be worried about. the broadband access, again, we're saying broadband, and broadband can be anything. It can be some kind of a transmitter that broadcasts in a small area to provide broadband. It can be fiber, it can be satellite, it can be anything. All we're doing is advocating for broadband. So I don't want us to get tied around the axle on saying, hey, there's something in the future, because that future may not pan out. Anybody that's ever had satellite TV can tell you that as soon as the storm comes and the tornadoes are coming, you lose your satellite TV right when you need it the most. And so I don't want to tie all of our horses to the future. I just want to say that in the future, we need all of our citizens to have broadband access, no matter what form that takes. If it works out that satellite in the future works great, I would have some doubt that in storms it would work great, but that's fine. I just want to make sure that we are on board advocating for broadband. I don't know what we're asking for, honestly, on Medicaid expansion. If it is Medicaid expansion, I don't support that being on our legislative agenda. If it's to take a look at some kind of and I don't know what this task force is, so it's never going to pass our legislature. So if it's totally Medicaid expansion, so we're taking and having our lobbyists advocate for something that's not going to happen. Finally, not finally, I'm sorry, I got one more after that. I want to make sure, I did mention expanding the judges for the Veterans Court and the Mental Health Court, but Glenda's picture's up here, so it reminds me, it takes more funding than just the judges, because there's a lot of other folks that are involved in making that successful. So, and Glenda's folks are critical to making that successful. So I don't want to just say it's something that works with our courts, because there are other parts of Sedgwick County that have to be involved. And now the final one, the 1/10 of a cent sales tax. I don't have a problem with that, honestly. We've been talking ever since I've been on the commission, and for years before that. We've got $1 billion with a B backlog of different projects that need to be done here in Sedgwick County to help with the flooding. And we don't have, we used to have a SMAB, a Stormwater Management Advisory Board, that advised us on things that we need to do, but we kind of disbanded that because we have no money to do anything. Luckily, there is a brick grant out there for one project. That one project is just a small part of what needs to be done throughout Sedgwick County. And I don't know if a 1/10 of a cent sales tax will work, but we could always put it before the voters and see if they want that, because if your home is subject to flooding because of this, I think people would support it. But we're not going to get anywhere if we don't start someplace. We had a briefing from Johnson County probably 3 years ago that this is what they do in order to be able to start alleviating the stormwater problems that they've got. And it does require a match. The sales tax comes in, but if a community says, hey, I've got this great project, all the money doesn't come out of that kitty. Part of it has to be a local match from whatever community that's involved. So those are kind of my comments on everything that I've gone through so far. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. Akeem, thank you for your work on this.
You're welcome,
This is a lot of things from a lot of different voices, and it's kind of hard to put it together. So I appreciate you getting it in this form for us to sort of pick apart. So I don't want to belabor the points that have been made, but I wonder if we can create some headers that we can then really dig deep in what we're going to be talking about. So I do have to agree that we can really shorten this up, and I'm willing to help you do that. I'd like to make sure that we include Tim and Joan in those conversations to say, like, if we had 4 main topics or whatever the number was we decided on would be, that we'd like to really dig down on, maybe that is, if we could agree on a number perhaps, because some of these are repetitive, and that's okay. What is the deadline for this?
I think our goal as commissioner is to have this approved by the first week of December.
Okay.
Because we have a number of bills that we want to write and work with Jason and legislators on to get those written, so to have them ready for the session in January.
Okay. And then, so if the first week in December is when we want to have it done, we'll probably have another discussion in the meantime. Do we have a meeting next week? A staff meeting next week?
We'll clean this up today. We'll have discussion during the BOCC meeting tomorrow. The intention is not to have staff meeting next week, but
Okay.
a staff meeting the week following that, which
Okay.
would be one before December 1st.
Okay, so I guess my next request would be, the next time we discuss this, if we could just take each issue as it is, everybody discuss it to the best of our ability. Obviously, things are going to come up later in conversation, but I think it might be easier to sort of navigate and manage it into a narrowed focus here.
Commissioner, I think we'll get a lot of headway tomorrow too. Jason will be here to
Okay.
help us kind of guide that. So he can kind of help us create, that focus that we're looking for.
So maybe if we could organize it with funding requests and then philosophical type things, as far as strengthen and enhance, those kinds of things. Under the criminal justice reform, the specialty courts, if we're going to be asking for a funding request, do we have that information as far as what it will cost?
Well, put a fiscal note on that as well.
Okay. As far as the CDDO goes, I do agree. I mean, elimination should be our goal, and I have to completely disagree that homelessness isn't solvable, because 14 communities around the nation have met a standard for ending veteran homelessness and chronic homelessness. So it is happening around the nation. There is proof that you can get to a functional zero rate with those subpopulations of people, and it should be our goal, and that should translate to other things like the CDDO when it comes to caring for folks in our community. Please remind me what the 10-cent or the sales tax, what was that? I'm sorry, I must have missed that.
It would be a vote of the people to add 1/10 of a cent sales tax. And that money, which would equate to about $10 million a year, would go into a stormwater relief fund similar to Johnson County's.
Okay, so that's just for stormwater? We're not going, that's it?
Well, stormwater, flood control, stormwater mainly, yeah, because
So the
big-
question I'm sorry.
the big ditch is kind of the
Okay.
flood place.
So Lindsay, I guess the question would go back to you. With the infrastructure bill, what kinds of things would that bill, and you're going to brief us on that, so when will you be briefing us on that?
The hope is December 8th. We had planned to
Okay.
come to you December 1st, but given the timing of holidays and such, we can't brief you in advance as much as we would like for that December 1st, so we'll come to you December 8th.
Okay, so what was the sales tax, was that something you were proposing to put on? Can you just brief me on that again? Apparently I just missed that.
Go ahead, Commissioner Howell.
So this goes back to like 1988, when this was given to the legislature allowed each county to do this back then, and only one county took them up. This is voter approved. Doesn't mean that we can't decide on our own to do this, but it's voter approved. It can pick any number you want up to 1/10 of a cent. It could be less than that. It could be 1/20 of a cent if you wanted to do that. It doesn't have to be 1/10. But the idea is that we would leverage this money against other projects across the county. That's the idea that the SMAB came up with, Stormwater Management Advisory Board. And this would hopefully leverage that money so we'd actually find other monies across the county to deal with some of these issues. Because right now there's an expectation from the entire population that Sedgwick County is going to somehow step in and solve these problems. There's not a revenue stream to address this. So to the extent people want these things to be solved, I want to give them a chance to vote for this. Now, which election cycle? I don't care. Whatever the legislature picks, it doesn't matter to me. I would also add on here, if you wanted to just to put your toes in the water, we could put a sunset on this, or we could have a reoccurring sunset. let's say 10 years or whatever, so that people know they're not stuck with this forever. It's up to the people. If they want the county government to do this and lead on this, give them the chance. But without some type of revenue stream, we're not going to be able to use property tax dollars, I don't think, to address billions of dollars worth of problems across the county, which is what we have. Thank you.
So I guess I would invite you to join the conversation with the Chamber of Commerce. The city-to-city trip we just had to Oklahoma City, there was discussion around the MAPS program that they have been doing down there. They are now on MAPS 4. That seems like it would kind of coincide with that, because if we're going to talk about asking the citizens if they want to pay for projects, there are a plethora of projects that could be considered. And I think that there is a group of folks kind of working on that. And so I would invite you to join in that conversation. That's all I have, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. And I would agree, there's a lot of priorities in the community for potential sales tax ballots, being countywide, citywide. I mean, Derby, I think, just passed theirs again this last election, little communities.
It's coming up.
Didn't Derby just
No.
pass the half cent?
Believe me, I would know.
Andover did.
Oh, Andover. Okay. Well, anyway, so it's a broad conversation, no question on it. It's a priority of taxpayer and voters. So I would agree with what you said, Commissioner Howell.
So again, to that last comment, I would agree that the citizens of Sedgwick County need to be asked if they want to provide a revenue stream to address mental health. I think by the way, this is probably the fourth or fifth time I brought this up. So there's not, I talk about stormwater, I talk about that over and over and over again, and I'm going to talk about mental health, the same thing. There needs to be a revenue stream that's earmarked and set aside and dedicated to issues of mental health. And then the people of our community need to be asked, do you want us to do this, yes or no? We can put together the question and let them vote. And it's not a referendum. I know Mike always says you can't do an opinion question. I'm talking about a binding vote, something that would create revenue stream. So it's perfectly legal to do this. So again, I think these issues ought to be in front of the voters. And in my opinion, sales tax is a much easier tax that can have sunset built in and things like that. And you can construct the program such that you can leverage that money for private sector funding as well. So if you want $25 million a year to do with mental health, we can put together that formula and create that opportunity for the community. It's really not that hard. And I've said this before, rather than waiting for the federal government or the state government to come and solve our problems, we need to be brilliant leaders and put this together and let's solve our own problems. We don't need them to solve it for us. We need permission, policy that authorizes us to make these solutions. We don't actually need their money. Why is that? Because, excuse me, their money is our money. They take it out of one pocket and give it back to us, put it in the other pocket. It's our own money. It's our own money. So if you follow the tax dollars, we're actually asking the state over and over and over again to tax us and then give us our money back. I don't think that's the only answer here. The other answer is let's just put the question in front of our own people, in front of our own leaders. Let's prioritize our dollars to the most important things in our world. Let's take care of those issues. We don't need state and federal government necessarily. Now, if they're going to offer money, let's take it. I agree with that. This infrastructure plan the president's going to do, or that they're doing right now, that money's going to come to Sedgwick County. And yes, we're going to be standing in line. We're going to ask for those dollars back, like everybody else, no question. But in terms of us not providing a service or a solution to our community because we don't have the money, and we're asking the state year after year after year after year to do something they're not going to do, I'm not content to sit by and let that happen. I'm content, I would rather see us put this question in front of the people. We don't have a single dollar of our own. Every dollar we spend comes from the people in this community. The question is, do they want us as their elected representatives to solve this problem, yes or no? If the answer is yes, then it's upon them to provide the revenue to make it happen. And do we need the state to do this? Not necessarily. We can do it on our own. My final comment was this. I noticed that saw Kevin Lantern was on the phone earlier, but there's two issues that are basically very similar. One is support EMS licensing study to lessen time for licensing. And there's also accelerating licensing for ComCare workers. Again, those could be the same bullet point that impacts multiple parts of Sedgwick County government. So again, trying to coalesce this into smaller numbers of statements, to me, I would say the common words of those two things, and then list those two things that be impacted by that policy. So that's enough said. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Commissioner Lopez, you've been a little bit hesitant. Are you all right? Okay. All right. Well, I would agree with some of the stuff that was talked about on priority and downsizing, Akeem. My observation, I would think when we talk about mental health, seems like the Community Crisis Center and a state mental hospital have always been a top request. It's more defined. Maybe that would be the first, but again, we can talk about that. So that's all in the prioritization that was talked about for sure. I think eventually, as Commissioner Cruz said, we could look at each item separately, discuss, and even potentially put it to a vote of the commission if we want to have it on a priority or on a secondary or not on at all. That maybe is the best way to get to it. Mike, you've been around this world. I don't know another way to I think we've done a nice job of getting ahead this year to try to gurgitate and regurgitate our stuff. In past, it's been happening rather quickly, so this is, although it's a lot of discussion, but we do have a real diverse opinions about some of these items, and so some of them will probably come down to a vote of, yeah, let's put it on or not. And so we do have enough, we have a lot of, there's some follow-up to do. I don't know if you have any closing comments, or Mike, your opinion, Akeem?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'll work on this. Yep.
So any other comments from the commission? Thanks for your input on everything. Okay. Commissioner Cruz has a comment.
Just the timeline, like when will we be revisiting this?
Tomorrow, Commissioner.
Okay, tomorrow at the BOCC meeting, right? So you're gonna have this all wrapped up?
Yep.
No.
Okay,
We won't have it wrapped up.
Okay.
I think the vision for tomorrow, we'll work on this today. I've got action items by almost everything. There's nothing for number 3, for example, Charter Commission that was discussed today. There could be some things on here. The commission has the ability to vote tomorrow on individual items, which helps to shape this further. But there's going to be a number of items on here that will clearly be December 1 before we can get them back to you with fiscal notes attached or policy statements written in a concise fashion. So I think we just take it one step at a time.
so we'll have 2 more public discussions of this,
I
tomorrow and
would
December
say-
1st.
I would say 3. We'll have tomorrow with Jason present. We will staff it on November 30, and we will hopefully vote on it December 1. What is left? You will have the ability to vote as you see fit tomorrow if there's items that you want to push forward by
Okay.
vote.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Thanks again. Okay, next up.
I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Fessinger or Mr. Papoon to discuss, just kind of brief through what we heard last night at Town Hall regarding redistricting and maybe get some movement forward on things that staff needs to be working on over the next few weeks. So, Mike, you want to go?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And Michael's here to answer any questions as well. But a couple of things that I derived from last night's meeting is that we really have, I don't know that staff has gotten a lot of guidance from the commission on how you want to proceed moving forward, and we probably need to discuss that. I'm not sure we have a defined process in mind at this point, and I thought it might be useful if we discussed today maybe what an ending date might be, or at least a target date for adopting a redistricting. I would probably throw out, and I think if we have that, then we can back up to see if we're going to have more town halls, if we're going to allow more CAB involvement, for how many other public meetings we need to have. But I would think that it would, there were a couple of things said last night that I think need to be clarified. There was talk that, well, there's no firm deadline of when we need to get this done. We have primaries coming up and that sort of thing. But realistically, the filing date is June 1. I think anybody running for office has an expectation several months before a filing date of what their district might look like, and whether or not they're going to run. Some people, I know Commissioner Howell in the past has filed by petition. I think people might want the opportunity to get petitions for filing. So I don't think we can wait till April or May to finish this process. I would suggest that probably a deadline of February 1 would be something we might shoot for, and then start getting ideas from you on the process prior to that, on how you want to proceed, how much more public involvement you want, how many more maps you want to consider, what kind of maps you want to consider, and that sort of thing. So I'm just throwing that out to get your feedback on that.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mike, for helping clarify that. Yeah, June 1st is a hard date, but you'd have to think that at least 90 or, I think I know we're being vague, but it seems like that January is a for sure drop dead for me, thinking that a person wanting to run for office in the year 22 with the deadline of June 1st ought to be considering what they're going to do or not in the first quarter of the 22 election cycle over the calendar year. So I appreciate you setting that up. And, you know, I lost in all this last night. It just dawned on me that, you know, 3 districts are already within the balance of the plus or minus pretty much. And I mean, really, if you did it really simple, we have one district that's too many and one district's not enough, and you could almost, anybody could do that on a napkin and justify that. But I do agree with some reshuffling of the deck, because some of them might look a little out of whack with stuff. But so that was just but I know there's a lot of opinions, and we represent 500,000 people, and so I think last night I counted there was 33 citizens there, and it seems like about half of them or so made comments. And I don't know how many comment cards. We're going to get a copy of the comment cards. Okay. Do you have any idea how many comment cards were submitted? About 10? Okay. All right. Okay. Commissioner Cruz.
Thank you, Chairman. First, thanks for having this conversation last night. You know, when the maps were drawn 10 years ago, this community input wasn't engaged with. And so I think that that's important to recognize that, yes, we are elected by the public, but the public is our boss, and they should drive this conversation in a way that they weren't given the opportunity to 10 years ago. I would love to propose setting a final date. I think that will give us, as Mr. Papoon has mentioned, something to shoot for. It will communicate to the community as far as deadlines in which they need to participate by. So I don't see any problem with February 1st. Is that something that we need to vote on? How do you suggest that we have discussion around the final end date, and then we start working backwards as far as further community engagement?
Commissioner Cruz, I don't know that we have to take a formal vote, but if it's a consensus of the board that February 1 is a reasonable date, then that's, I'm sure Tom and his staff and our legal department will start working to get together with you and see what other processes you want to have to make that date a realistic deadline. But if 3 of you right now say, no, I want this done by the end of the year, then we probably need more discussion from the bench and to tell me, no, February 1's not realistic, January 1 should be the date, or I'm ready to vote tomorrow. I mean, you know, it's all being driven by the county commission. I agree citizen input is very important, but ultimately it's the decision of the 5 of you.
So Chairman, if I may just take open this discussion for what the final date would be amongst my colleagues here.
Yeah, Commissioner Howell.
Before we discuss it that way, I'd like to make an observation, again, back to your point, Mr. Papoon, and I appreciate that point of reference. I always file by petition. I've never filed any other way. Here it is today, and I do it all the time. That petition gives you 180 days to get signatures to qualify. And June 1st is, I guess, halfway through the year. So I guess I would like to see us, just out of respect for anybody who would want to run for one of these seats and file by petition, to give them the full 180 days. We really ought to try to finish this up in December. Early on, I'm not sure what month we started this process this year. I think it may have been August. I think it was August when we started this
I
year.
think early September, sir, we got the final census numbers.
I mean, my first take at this was it looked pretty simple. It didn't look like it was all that hard. I would say most of these maps are fairly non-concept. Most of these maps are not that difficult. They're pretty small changes for the most part. Map 5 being the exception, and probably maps 9 and 10 being the exception as well. But nevertheless, out of those first 8 maps, 7 of them were pretty easy to understand. They weren't that complicated. There was some discussion early on about, expediting this and getting to a conclusion almost within a couple weeks when this first came up. And I cautioned us to take our time. And I still want to take our time, but how much time? I think if we take too long, it is getting into the election cycle. Arguably, with that petition window of 180 days, we're starting to mess with the election. So it would be best, we have a whole month from right now till December 15th. I would rather see us, if we can, wrap this up by December 15th, simply so that staff has time to update everything that's online, the election office has time to update everything they have to deal with, the constituents have time to analyze their opportunities, things like that. December 15th would be a good date, and I think if we get into January and February, you are beginning to mess with the election cycle. So I would rather not wait that long. I don't think there's a reason to wait that long. This ought to be a priority for all of us to get this done. Whatever time we need to get this moving forward, we've got a whole month between December 15th to make our arguments known and to settle on 3 to get this to pass. I don't know that we need, I could vote today if we had to vote right now, I could vote right now. So again, to take another 3 months at this, to me, is really unnecessary. Even if we did this in a month, we still have time for another town hall if we want to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner Lopez.
Just a question. Do we know how long after we go through this process and put the maps out that elections needs to update everything and make sure everything's good to go for the primary?
That'd be a question for Angela. When Tabitha was the commissioner, she always wanted things by April, May, so that she could get her system set up for an August primary. I would imagine it'd be something to that same degree.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that we need to be cognizant of what the potential candidates will have. And if they've got 180 days to get their signatures, we need to give them that. At first, I thought maybe 1 January might be a good date, but the problem is I just looked at the calendar, and probably our last meeting is going to be on 15 December before 1 January. So somewhere, if we could have everything done by 15 December, that'd be great. But I don't know how much we'll get done between 15 December and 1 January. So I don't know which one of those 2 dates is best. But if we need to set a deadline, no later than 1 January. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Howell.
Just to make a point of clarification, to give a full 180 days, we'd have to have this done by December 1st. So that's the first point I'd make. Anything after December 1st, you're cutting into that 180-day window. I have a technical question as well. Cities are probably going to do their redistricting once they get their new city councils seated and things kind of settle out. Wichita, for example, and I'm thinking about Derby because it's where I live, but as they redistrict their council districts, the first number in their precinct is associated with that council district. In other words, if you're a council district number 3, all your precincts begin with a 3. And if you're in Derby and you're in Ward 4, all your precincts start with DB4, and on it goes. So if they redistrict and they move, if you will, precincts back and forth across those lines, are they going to have to renumber those precincts to keep that association? In other words, let's say you're in 412, for example, and you moved over to District 3 Do you have to give that a new number so that you have a association with council district number 3?
Good morning, Commissioners. Mike Fessinger, Assistant County Counselor. Commissioner, I don't know the answer to that, but I can find that out today and get you an answer.
I'm going to assume that that's true because it is that way today, and redistricting in cities has to happen. And the reality is that's going to require a lot of effort by someone, GIS and election staff, to get all this caught back up again. So I don't want to see cities wait until the last possible moment because it impacts even this next year's election. And the state, of course, can't wait until the very end of the session for the very same reason. So there is an urgency to get this done sooner than later. I think if we wait until February, it's going to have a negative impact, and I think in more ways than one. So, thank you, Chairman.
Yeah. My hope, I thought that all they have to do is just renumber the precincts, personally. I don't think it's that. And I know from the city perspective, they don't have a city council election for 2 more years. So speaking with some last night, I mean, it's a task that they got to accomplish, but they're not in a hurry like we are in state elections for 22. And I don't know what places like Derby, what their other local elections are. So anyway, so Mike, if you can find out how difficult the renumbering is on that precinct world, thank you. Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. I guess I would just have to ask, what is the purpose of a town hall if we're not going to listen to those who spoke to us last night? I mean, I didn't hear one person say to hurry up and make this finalized. If anything, I heard the majority of people saying take the time, get community input, and make sure that these maps are fair. That's the number one theme that I heard. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Did I hear something different?
Well, I don't think I didn't have information about the 180-day sign up. So if I'd have known that, I probably would have encouraged a sooner than later world, like Commissioner Howell's saying. But that's news to me that if the state rules about elections are petitioned by 180 days, that's new information for me.
Right, but that's not the only factor in which someone can file for office. So
Oh, I agree. I'm just going to say what the rules are.
Sure. And I understand giving the full time, and if that was the case and we were able to do that, I'd certainly like to allow that time. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it's important to listen to the people who elected us. And last night they told us to take our time and make sure that we do this right. Especially given that 10 years before, they weren't given this opportunity. So that's what I'd have to say. When we have people who are standing in front of us who have engaged in the process and we have asked for their input, it's important that we listen to their voices.
I agree. I think all 5 of us were intently listening last night. That was good stuff. I don't know who was first, Commissioner Dennis or Commissioner Howell? Commissioner Dennis.
Well, I appreciate the comments of Commissioner Cruz, and we try and be open and transparent. We try and make sure that we allow the citizens to participate, but we got to remember that we've got over 500,000 citizens in Sedgwick County, and 33 people showed up last night. So at what point have we said that we've heard from the community and we're going to react to what they said? We heard from a handful of people that actually spoke, and 33 people were there. So I've gotten 1 or 2 emails. I don't know how much more that we need to do when we provided a meeting and 33 people showed up. Thank you.
And Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to also reiterate that this is not the only way that we can interact with people. I have 3 community meetings each month. I'm very available, accessible. We have newsletters. We have cab boards. This has been all over the news. If they want to make phone calls or emails or meet privately in my office or wherever in the community, I'm certainly willing to have as much connection to the community as they want to understand their needs and perspectives on this issue. But one question that came up last night was, is there a deadline? And of course, the answer is no, there's not a deadline, which is true. But I think the interpretation of that was we got plenty of time. I don't know that that's the right interpretation. I think the proper interpretation is, we don't have a deadline, but this ought to be a matter of urgency. Let's get this done, because it matters to other people. For the election process to be truly democratic, we have to provide opportunities for people to have full engagement in the process. And that doesn't mean, if we waited until, let's say, May of next year, which would be terribly long, that would absolutely impact the election process. Nobody thinks that's okay. So the reality is that there's common sense urgency here to this. And I think that if people want to engage this, I encourage them, please contact us and get involved. We would welcome that. I don't mind having another town hall, but to the extent we disregarded their comments last night, that's not true at all. I listened intently. I even listened to it again last night when I got home. One of my takeaways is there's competing interests here. There's arguments of gerrymandering, there's arguments of keeping communities together, there's arguments of diversity of districts, that whether we should, even them out some way. There's discussions about disenfranchisement because people put onto a 6-year term. I heard all these arguments last night. The reality is there's no perfect map. We're going to do the very best we can. I want to be respectful to the process and to the people that made those comments, but the answer is no one's going to get all of those things together because it can't be done. These are competing ideas. So we're going to do the best we can. And at the end of the day, I heard what they said. I am listening, and I'm very available to continue this discussion any way they want to do it. I don't mind having another town hall. But the accusation that we're not listening or we are disregarding, that's not true at all. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, we'll continue onward with this process. Okay. Commissioner Cruz?
So when are we going to make a decision? I think that's what they're asking us to do, is to make a decision so that we know how to move forward.
We have meetings on December 15, January 5, and February 2.
Okay. Well, we can take an off-agenda item tomorrow and make a motion if somebody feels that we ought to put a deadline and vote on it. That's what I see. And if there's a mood to have further discussion and talk about it, then that could be the end motion. If somebody makes a motion to set a deadline, we'll vote on it. If not, that'll mean that we're still talking about it. We all know there's a deadline around the corner sometime. So that would be my suggestion. Then we can get it to finalization. Anything else? Okay. We have a meeting tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow. We're adjourned.